Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. To start with, we have an interesting question. Parties that I hear and read a lot about mental health. And what is it? It's a rather simple question, isn't it? There isn't any of us who hasn't heard that expression about mental health many times, use it many times. But I think the answer is rather interesting, and I'll give the answer that I heard. The American Psychiatric Association established a commission headed up by a top psychiatrist, and that commission studied mental health. I was privileged to be at the meeting, the convention, where this commission made its report. It was in Boston. And the commission, amid all the fanfare you can imagine of 5 years of study, he got up and said, "The commission has concluded that mental health is the absence of mental illness." And he sat down. Now that was the whole summary statement of 5 years. Many of us in the audience chewed and groaned and agonized, but actually we never did come up with a better answer, as far as I know, any of us. So that's really what it is. Health is the absence of illness. When you start getting into degrees of health, you get into all sorts of other things. Well, here's another one. It says, how can I, or is it possible to get over my feelings of inferiority? Yes, it's possible, and you can. Ask yourself first, what are you good at? What do you like to do? If you can find something you're good at, well, you're already on the road. But think of yourself in a relative position. All of us are different. No two of us are alike. And that means we are all somewhere in some scale being better than or less capable than somebody else. So when you talk about inferiority, you have to be specific. I'm inferior to a lot of people who are more intelligent than I am. But is that what we're really talking about? I like the expression that Eleanor Roosevelt said, that no one can make you or can make us feel inferior without our consent. If we're talking about a basic worthiness, then none of us are inferior. For example, if we were to make an assumption, and I'm happy to do that, if we all have a soul, then our souls are equal. And there's no soul better or lesser quality than another one. I like that one. And it's served me very well, trying to help people get over a lot of things. I find that people who have a religious belief in the soul are most of the time a little easier to work with about that sort of thing. Here's one that's sort of troublesome, and I've heard this type of thing more and more, and it's always troublesome. Party said, my grandson is 8, and he often talks of suicide or just killing himself. Should I be concerned? The answer is yes. It's not normal for a person of 8 or any age to really talk about dying. And be attentive, be alert. An 8-year-old or anyone else who talks of suicide is hurting, is in pain. Find out what the pain is. The person has already given you a signal. It says, I want to die, I want to kill myself, or something like that. Well, that's sufficient reason to ask questions. It, by the way, never hurts to ask someone, are you suicidal? Some people are afraid, well, if I ask, it's going to tip the scale and the person was really going to kill himself. Well, there's no evidence that it works that way. I've worked in this area for many years and specialized in suicides. But children who are confronted with family breakups or the threat of family breakups, or who have very serious problem at school, friends or associates, and of course you get into the preteens and the young teenagers. You get into things like that, you may come up with other types of crises. But anybody who's really in a crisis situation and talks of suicide, take it seriously. There is no such thing as a artificial concern. If you're concerned and it's not suicidal, still benefited the person, maybe even yourself. Maybe this is a good time to review some of the evidences of suicide. A person talks about, well, I won't be here tomorrow, or in the future you won't have me to put up with. Starts talking about being absent in the future. That's not a good sign. Talks about giving, or does give things away, personal possessions. Here, you can have this, I won't need it anymore. Or talks openly of suicide. If you find people who are depressed, truth is, depression doesn't cause suicide, but most people who attempt suicide are depressed. People who are depressed and preoccupied, some people are, with death. Alcohol, drugs get involved, crisis situations. People feel helpless, hopeless, worthless, useless. Bad combination of terms, sometimes called the disastrous triangle. Those three things, particularly helpless, hopeless, and useless. The person needs attention. Now, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, that person just needs attention. Well, think about it. If that person needs attention, why not give it to him? What's it going to hurt? Are you afraid of being duped? I've listened to numerous professionals, peers of mine, associates over the years who didn't want to deal with somebody, excuse me, because, oh, they might be wrong. They might feel duped. Well, so what? What's more important? I changed my approach on this many years ago, and I'm very direct by comparison to most people. And I think this is wood. I haven't had a suicide in 47 years. Anybody I was working with actively. It hasn't occurred. There may have been people who suicided later that I've heard about, of course. That's always a possibility. But suicide takes many forms. There are actually 10 types of suicides. Most people think, well, there are many ways of killing yourself. That's true. I'm not talking about ways. I'm talking about types. Basically, direct and indirect. And some of these indirect ways, like some people just miscalculate the risk factors and die as a result. But their miscalculation has an element of wanting to get pretty close to death. Some people commit suicide in a chronic way. That sounds strange, but chronic suicides. They may be addicts. They may know that with each drink their liver gets worse, or some cirrhosis compounds and so on. But their intention may be not to live, and it may be over a period of years. Suicide by neglect. People who, let's say, go mountain climbing and leave their heart medicine at home. People, insulin-dependent diabetics, and leave their insulin in a place that can't be obtained where they're going. Focal suicides. Suicides that are specifically to hurt somebody. Unfortunately, that's what's involved with a lot of kids who suicide. Fortunately, a lot of kids don't suicide. I've read and heard people toss numbers around like, oh, did you know that suicide has become one of the 10 leading causes of death in young people? Well, it's not a matter of it having become that. It's been that for many, many years. In other words, most kids live. They're pretty healthy. And so something happens. They have an accident. A child's heart it's just going to keep on working if it gets plenty of oxygen. That's basic rule of thumb. It's certainly a rule of thumb in emergency medicine, that anytime a child has a heart arrest, cardiac arrest, chances are it's because the child can't breathe. So treatment of choice is to open that airway and get some oxygen into them as quickly as you can. Usually the heart will kick back up if you get to them soon enough. Well, there are people who call automated suicide. They keep thinking of drugs and taking medication, maybe prescribed medication. Well, one pill is good, two will be better, and they escalate. There are people who are existentialists, who really have a negative opinion about the world and the future. They really don't believe there is a future. These people may then act in, even try to get others to act in certain ways that are negative. There are people who conclude, they've weighed all the pros and cons. What's the advantage of living? What's the advantage of not living? Like some older person who has a terminal illness decides to die. Why bother? Well, there's then the strange kind of thing, suicide by murder. There have been some shows about this sort of thing lately. Somebody who deliberately puts himself or herself in a position where others are going to kill him. Suicide always communicates. There's a message. So try to find out what the message is. What is it you want to say? What is it you want to tell me? What is it you want people to know? I've used that expression with numerous people when I've been involved in them. What is it that you want people to think or to know about you? What is this supposed to be expressing? And sometimes it'll just open right up and tell you a clear message. Sometimes it's a little difficult. Remember, it doesn't hurt to ask questions. It doesn't hurt. Always take their comments seriously. A basic rule of thumb is that somebody who is talking or acting suicidal is feeling pain. And most of the time, they don't really want to die. They want to get rid of the pain. And if you find out how to get rid of the pain and work with a person, because at the time when people start thinking and talking suicide, their thinking becomes narrow. They quit thinking about alternatives. They quit thinking about options. So when they are made or helped to realize that there are ways of getting rid of the pain besides dying, that's usually sufficient. People quit making an effort talking about it. It's very important. Suicidal triangle. How I evaluate seriousness of whether or not somebody's really likely to die. I always take talk of suicide seriously. But how quickly should I act on certain things? Like I can pick up a radio and call 911 almost any time of the day or night. But suicide triangle. Is a person angry? Is a person hostile? Is a person disturbed? And what is the method that's being talked about? Sometimes people are very serious about suicide. Fortunately, though, they picked a method that may not be particularly dangerous. Other times, the method will scare you. It immediately rings bells that this is very serious and action has to be taken. It's kind of scary sometimes. But most people don't want to die. What they want to do is get rid of pain, the pain that they're suffering. And you think about that little 8-year-old. What's going on in the family? Talk to the parents. This was a grandparent. What's going on? Is that family breaking up? Is this youngster feeling the pain of that family breakup? Well, helps to straighten things out. Triangle of despair. Hopeless, helpless, worthless. That's a bad combination. Anybody who feels that for any long period of the day should seek help. I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Have a good day. Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Start with sort of a broad question. Excuse me, but it's a question that keeps popping up in different areas. So do you really think politics explains the major social changes and the family values that we're seeing today? Politics is a major variable, but it's not the only variable. You know, when you really talk about politics, you can have politics that could be doing the opposite. Could be strengthening families, could be strengthening communities and countries and nations. Then there are the politics which can go the other way. So just politics itself, it depends on what it is. So I don't think that really explains it, but there's some things that go together when you have a political machine pushing them. And right now we have a marriage in a sense. We have extremely liberal, and I'm saying liberal because it's a humanistically oriented political philosophy. We have that tied to an educational system that's also humanistically oriented. Most educators, at least the teachers and profs that I've met along the way, they do this willfully and deliberately. They're trying to teach people to be independent thinkers. That's great, isn't it? We all want to be independent thinkers. But to teach a child to be an independent thinker without parents, without guidance, without a religion, it's a little hazardous. So some of these well-meaning profs, certainly on a graduate level, I've listened to them. They don't take that step. What this really does to young people, or allows to happen. Great, we all want to teach independent thinking, but we also, I prefer teaching, when I'm guilty of teaching, to teach people that you can be independent and also recognize that there are other things and other powers, a greater power, if you will, that doesn't keep me from thinking independently. We also have this media that's oriented toward pushing, exploiting whatever is wild and ruthless. We have a media that sometimes gets involved, and I say sometimes because it's sometimes the opposite, but in knocking down value systems, the icons, the iconoclastic programming. Some programs seem to be just written, presented to show that somebody gets away with practicing in something besides the standard beliefs. And I say standard because in most societies, most cultures, most religions, there's a common core of values that keep people alive and keep people functioning. And whatever it may be. Some have said the great living religions have a core of values that in some ways could be substituted one for the other. And some of the values, of course, are uniquely different. But that's what we're having right now. We're having a political machine tied to an educational package, tied to a media, and things are moving very rapidly. So to answer the question, do I think politics explains social change? It's part of it. The same word, politic, you can turn it around now. It can also help to recapture. And I think that's important to keep in mind. Here's another one. It says, my only son is living with his girlfriend and plans to come home over the summer. He knows I don't believe in what he's doing, but he insists that if I don't agree to it, I don't love him. What should I do? It seems I hear that question every spring, pretty often. And I hear people talk about it. What should you do? Be true to yourself. Your son won't respect you anymore if you cave in. If you don't believe that he should live with his girlfriend in your house or anywhere else, but particularly in your house, be clear. Be honest. Be straightforward. Be upright. And say, these are my values in this house. That doesn't go. Do you think he will get upset? He might. But he knows your values. Do you think he will say you don't love him? He might. But does that keep you from loving him? Obviously it doesn't. You know, every parent, as soon as we become parents, we find out that we have to take stands and we have to help children learn to discriminate. Hot stoves and dangerous things and the danger of crossing streets. That's what parents are for at first, is to help children learn to decide and learn how to stay out of trouble. And even before the child can think through and learn, we're obligated to protect the child. Well, that's our function, that's our duty, and sometimes in this modern age, we get caught up in saying, well, if I do what I'm supposed to do, then I'm going against the grain, I'm swimming upstream. Yeah, might be in some cases, but you'll find that it's probably worth it in the long run. There are alternatives. People don't have to live together. That was unheard of in the college days of yesteryear, so to speak. People didn't go off to school to shack up. They went to school to learn something. Most people did. They were serious about it. Many of the academies, the notable academies, had rules against even becoming seriously involved and frowned on it with the opposite sex. But certainly the same sex, that was just unheard of. Your son's trying to impose his moral values on you, and accusing you of trying to impose yours on him. Well, you're not imposing. These are the values that he grew up with. You're just pointing out that the standard's still there. So my suggestion, bite the bullet, be clear, be consistent, be firm, be honest about it, and don't forget to love him in spite of it. Here's another one. It says, I've read of a group called Courage. That's for homosexuals. Do you know anything about it? Have you ever heard of it? Yes. Both. Courage is a group that was started by a priest down in the Archdiocese of New York, Father John Harvey. And this is for people who either want to change, who are practicing homosexuality and they want to change and become celibates or heterosexuals, but they want to do so within the framework of the church, Christian beliefs. It's not limited to Christians. There are plenty of people who practice Judaism who could also be encouraged, but the idea is to live within the religious teachings and have the support of other people like themselves. That's what courage is. And it's very successful, even though it started in New York City just a few years ago. It's found in most of the major cities now. Chapters of it, and they're usually tied in with a church group so that people can practice their religion without practicing the homosexuality. That's the difference. Now, there's another group called Dignity, and there are several other groups. Homosexuals who want to be identified in a religion, but they don't want to give up homosexuality and they want to practice that openly. That's a different group, different purpose altogether. There's also a group which is a spin-off from Courage. It's called Encourage, which is a group of family members who have that kind of problem in the family in common. And I say problem. There are professional groups right now that would chastise me for calling it a problem. Actually, some serious professional groups are saying that if somebody were to come to me and say to me, Dr. Middleton, can you help me give up homosexuality, or could you help me start living a lifestyle that does not include homosexual practices? And if I were to accept a person and try to help that person do that, they would say I was unethical, that it's not part of what I'm supposed to do. It's a strange sort of thing right now, very strange. And I don't agree with that. Somebody comes to me and wants me to help him or her to live a lifestyle that's not contradictory to my own beliefs. I don't try to work with people who want to live a lifestyle, want me to help them do something that contradicts my belief system. I don't think that's honest. But if somebody wants me to try to work with them, I think I have an obligation to try. Some people say, well, you're being unethical. No, I'm not. They'd say you shouldn't try to work with that because it's not a problem. But if the person has a problem, he or she feels it's a problem, that's what makes it a problem. Until that person can figure it out, how it isn't perhaps a serious problem. Oh, there are all kinds of political things going back and forth on this right now, but I think it's something so different to be considered unethical for trying to help somebody achieve a life that the person wants to achieve that's not in contradiction to any laws. I find that a little strange. And somebody wants to really jump on the case, I can get along without the group. I don't have to go that way. Here's another question. That someone I know has a fear of dying that just paralyzes her. Is there any help for this ailment? Yes. There are two kinds of help. That's just to say the way it was described sounds like an anxiety situation. It could be a phobic situation, which is a type of anxiety, but one way of helping is medication. There are certain medications and certain conditions that seem to match up very well. The other is some kind of psychotherapy, and there are very specific psychotherapies available now for phobias and some kinds of anxieties, and some of them have remarkable results. I have heard about, read about a number of cases. I've actually seen people get over lifetime phobias, or what was virtually years and years of a phobia, in a matter of minutes. It's comforting. There are even people who are so afraid that they're housebound, they can't leave their home. They're afraid to get out. Sometimes this sort of thing is available and very simple. I recall 3 women in another place one time asked me if I would come to their homes in the same, it wasn't in this immediate area, house calls. Well, people in my business typically haven't done house calls, but even house calls are helpful. Well, here's another one. As you've mentioned sometime, people not having core values, like they once did. Well, I guess I have to qualify what a core value is. A person's asking me what I meant too. Because core values can be negative. I was talking about a core of good values, a core of good values seems to be common for most people, but we have today what I had mentioned at another time about we have the politics and the education and the media combining to teach people something different from what was once considered the important core values. Yes, we're trying to help young people more and more to learn to be so independent that they don't seem to have, like they once did, a basic core from which they can operate. They can take different viewpoints. It's like the question, do I believe in teaching comparative religions? Yes, but only to people who already have a basic religious belief. I don't believe in teaching comparative religions to young people who are scattering in what they may be doing. If they have been reared in a family that doesn't have a particular religion, I think they ought to be taught a religion. And if the person is an adult or an adult thinker and is exploring, that's something else. But to teach comparative religion as such, I think it's much easier and better to have a basic premise from which to operate. Until another time, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Have a good day. Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. I have a question today that came up, and is one that I hadn't thought about a good long while. It says, have you ever seen a person you thought was hopeless, hopelessly mentally ill? Let's put it in context. The answer is yes. I used to think that. I used to think there were people who were hopelessly mentally ill. But you know, I first challenged this a number of years ago in myself, because I used to meet classes, schools who were making tours and visits of mental hospitals, and like psychology class. I would do that sort of thing for the hospital and meet and talk with these classes. And I would, at this particular time, I would demonstrate somebody as somebody who was hopeless. Now, it turned out the person I was demonstrating had been a psychologist. And this person had been, at the time, in that lock room where she lived for 7 years. Very small room. And she was fed through a hole in the door. The personnel who worked with her, they didn't want to open the door. She would fight, and she would scratch, and she would scream, but she was also a decorator. She saw them smeared, and she would plaster people. But I would demonstrate this person is hopeless. And I was honest. I was sincere at the time, but it shows you sometimes that honesty is not accurate. You can be honest and still be wrong, I found out. Here's what happened. Strange coincidence. I didn't have anything to do with it. The psychiatrist in charge of this particular unit was changed, and the psychiatrist who took over that treatment for a particular building was an obsessive compulsive person. This psychiatrist, I'm sure she's dead now, but she was a delightful person, but she could not stand dirt. She could not stand germs. I used to kid her a little bit. I won't call the name, but I used to say, hey, I saw you washing the dirt off the roots of your flowers the other day. Well, she'd do that. She'd get out there and plant, dig the flower up, wash the dirt off, and put it back in the ground. She wasn't logical, but she was a sharp psychiatrist. But here's what happened to that woman who was hopeless. In my opinion, she was hopeless. This psychiatrist says every place is going to be clean. There's not going to be dirt in this room where this woman has been. It's not going to be allowed to stay that way. And it's going to be cleaned every day. That's what people in hospitals are used to. This room is going to be cleaned every day. What happened? Well, they got several people around, opened the door and took this woman out of the room, cleaned the room, put her back in. They did that every day. You know what happened? That patient got to where she looked forward to it. She got out of the room. She started being able to just sit and wait for him to clean the room. She wasn't fighting and screaming and hollering. She had a voice that sounded like a frog. She had screamed and hollered for so long. She didn't really sound like a human being, just croaking. She quieted down. She started, they'd open the door, she'd walk out, stand quietly, not fight anybody. And she started very slowly talking to people. One day I was over, I passed by at the time. She was sitting outside the room while our room was being cleaned. And she asked me for a tablet, a writing tablet. Sure. She wasn't my patient or anything. I wasn't assigned to her for any particular reason. But I got her a tablet, one of these yellow tablet things that we had plenty of around the place. And she started writing. She wrote 3 books. The first one was all jumbled up. I mean, language-wise, wording, the grammar, syntax, some people say. It was difficult to read. But the message was, she was writing her life in that room. She wrote another book. And then the third book, which was pretty well put together, still was autobiographical, but was an explanation of how she became ill. And it was interesting. Well, the good thing about the story is that woman, after a while, didn't have to have the door locked. She just progressed right along. And I heard from the psychiatrist several years after that she had gone out of the hospital and was living with relatives, adjusting, had not gone back to work. That was a hopeless case. I had another hopeless case I used to think of, somebody who'd been in, it was the only person who'd been in all the Texas mental hospitals, the state hospitals. Many diagnoses. You name it, he'd had it. All the way from alcoholism, bipolar, schizophrenia. He'd had all kinds of good diagnoses. Long story short, I did have the opportunity of working with him. Last I heard of him, he was working for one of the major research electronic companies as a researcher. He was also one of the geniuses. I've met very few geniuses in my life, but that man was a genius. I gave him an intelligence test one day. And after I finished, I sat there and just puzzled. I hadn't even touched his intelligence. He answered everything correctly in the shortest period of time. He'd earned the maximum score that the test could generate. And I hadn't even begun to test to see how intelligent he was. He was so far above me. I could go on and on stories about his accomplishments. Once he started doing things. And he did things just for the fun of it. He learned to play cornet in about 2 weeks. He'd never had any music lessons. He went over to occupational therapy and worked over there a while and carved a wooden calculator. Made one. It was made of wood. And it would work. He would make crossword puzzles and designs just by thinking about it and make them up. Very quick, very fast learner. That was part of his success. And there was another woman, young lady. She'd had a lobotomy operation. She'd had all kinds of goodies. She left the hospital and made the highest scores that anybody ever made in the comptometry school. That used to be the fancy thing that was a forerunner of big calculators and computers. Comptometry was a big thing. She made the highest scores anybody ever made. Had a good grasp of it. Did well. Well, long story short, no. I don't believe now in hopeless cases, but there was a time when I did, and I have a lot of sea stories I could go into about that sort of thing. But, well, if you're interested, give me a call. We can talk about them. Here's a question that's, well, a little bit related to the last one. Says, do I believe a person can wish to die and die? Yes. There used to be a condition called terminal catatonia, where people seem to get on the road to dying in spite of the fact that no physical condition or disease could be found that would justify the person dying. It's kind of eerie. I've been around 3 people with that condition over a period of years and years. I haven't seen one lately. But it's, you hear about this sort of thing in some of the Eastern religions. But the people I knew were not practicing religion. They had decided within their own disordered thinking that they needed to die and were going to die. Fortunately, somebody in Arkansas found a treatment for this sort of thing. It was rather interesting. It was based on behavioral therapy, but it was fascinating to see this sort of thing at work. Well, relating to that, just the opposite, the question comes up, do I have a prescription for healthy living? Yes. I have opinions about most everything, but a prescription for healthy living is simple. Live in such a way that you fulfill your needs, your basic needs. What are they? You need to feel that you get sufficient recognition. You need to feel that you're good at something, anything. You need to have new experiences. Do things differently. Think about something in a different way, but new experiences, everybody needs them. We have a need, of course, for explaining ourselves to the world and the world to ourselves. A basic need there. We have a need for to have an intimate relationship. A relationship with people. It seems that the good Lord made us to be with people. All mammals are gregarious, that is, they have a herd instinct. They like to be with others of the kind. Well, we have that. We have a big dose of it since we're big mammals. We have a need to be in a particular relationship. Intimate relationship doesn't mean a physical intimacy necessarily, but it's a relationship in which we can feel genuinely accepted. And you put these needs together. The last one is self-esteem. We need to feel good about ourselves. Why wouldn't a person be happy if the needs are being fulfilled? And of course, when people start thinking about fulfilling your needs, they usually come up with a question, well, what do you think is the most important? I'll just take the answer that somebody else gave quite a few years ago. A psychoanalyst called Morton Prince. He said, our greatest needs, what we have least of at the moment. I like that answer. Because as soon as you have, for example, if I have a need for recognition, I'm recognized, somebody gives me recognition, okay, that need goes away for the time being. Another one takes its place. I have a need for something else. So it's what I have least of at the moment, the greatest need. You see, you put all that together, of course, physically we need food, clothing, and shelter. The shelter is some kind of protection from the environment. It may be clothing, it may be housing, warmth, or cooling, whatever it may be. but the basic biological necessities. Creature needs, somebody has called them. Now, sure, I'm well aware that Maslow has written on this sort of thing about the hierarchy of needs. Well, these aren't really contradictory to Maslow, although this need list came into being before Maslow popularized his. Yeah, great. I'm not opposed to Maslow. Where he talks about the hierarchy of becoming self-actualized, I think it's the need of a philosophy to explain the world to ourselves and ourselves to the world. And I don't really fuss about Maslow except when people start trying to push that for people to become self-actualized. To become self-actualized in a way is pushing people to become their own gods. And I don't particularly go that way. I think that causes many more problems than it helps. There are very few people in Maslow's framework who can become self-actualized, who can become truly independent thinkers. And he gave a list as an example, and there are very few people. But I've seen this being taught at elementary school level, trying to help children become self-actualized. I wondered about it. Well, what do they really want these children to do? You take a fourth grader independent of family? That doesn't make any sense to me. But somebody accused me of being logical about some things. Others have accused me of being illogical. But whatever. That is an opinion. I don't think most people come anywhere near close to being their own gods. A lot of people want to be. That's for certain. I think that is a common factor with people. But should we? Not in my book. Well, until another time, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Have a good day.